Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Dare to Dream book talk, our book talk series on immigration and issues related to immigration, sponsored by the Dream Project and Busboys and Poets. My name is Mark Habib. I'm a member of the board of the Dream Project. For those of you who don't know about the Dream Project, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary. We provide mentoring, social support, and importantly, college scholarships to immigrant students in Northern Virginia, throughout Virginia. And we are delighted to be in partnership here with Busboys and Poets. I'd like to thank Andy Shalal for hosting the series with us, Patrick Bonesteel, who's doing all the technology work for us tonight, and Meg Phillips on our side, who is the Dream Project's Director of Development. Tonight's book talk is one that I am been really excited about and have been anticipating for a while, because it's a wonderful book that came out in the fall by Roberto Lovato, and it's called Unforgetting, a Memoir of Family, Migration, Gangs, and Revolution in the Americas. This book, which I personally highly recommend, and I think after you hear the conversation, you will be interested in reading it too, is available from Busboys and Poets. You can check the comment section on the screen and find the link to buy it. It's as easy as buying it from the Amazon people. You just click the button and Busboys will send it to you. So please support our co-sponsor tonight. Also on the link is a connection to the Dream Project's donor page. We rely on donations from individuals, foundations, but individual donations are very important for us. So please visit the Dream Project website, visit the donation page, and consider making a gift to the Dream Project. Now, I'm really delighted to introduce our host tonight, who's going to have the conversation with Roberto. And it is Dr. Marie Price, who is one of my friends and colleagues on the board of the Dream Project. Marie also serves on the board, chairs our scholarship committee. Marie is professor of geography and international relations at George Washington University. She is actually president of the American Geographical Society. Her expertise is on Latin America and migration and economic development in Latin America. So she is the perfect raconteur with Roberto. So I'm going to turn it over to Marie and get our program started.
Thank you, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here. I think we're going to start with one of our Dream scholars, a young man named Ricardo, who is also from El Salvador. And he's going to talk a little bit about his experience to the United States, and he's currently a student in Shenandoah University. Ricardo, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Price. Yes, my name is Ricardo, and I am currently a student at Shenandoah University and Conservatory. I'm a voice performance and business administration double major, and I will share briefly a little bit about my story, my family story, and the way it connects to the book. So my family first migrated to the US in the 80s during the Civil War. Most of my uncles had to flee our country, El Salvador, because there were the guerrilla and the other groups that were fighting in the military were recruiting kids at a young age, like teenagers and like people between their 15. And my grandmother and my grandfather decided to actually send my uncles out of the country in order to protect them, because all kids were being recruited. And so they fled in the 80s during the Civil War. At the age of 17, I was just a student in high school back in El Salvador with my brother and my mom. We were all there. And my family was threatened by gang members shortly after one of my uncles had been murdered by also gang members. So we had to flee El Salvador in 2015, and we made our first trip to the US. We crossed Mexico, and unfortunately, just a few hours away from the US border, we were caught by the Mexican immigration officers, and we were deported back to El Salvador. And so then we were in El Salvador for about a month. The process took about also a month. And then we also tried again to come back to the US on our trip because we weren't able to continue our lives in El Salvador because we felt threatened and we felt like our lives were being at risk after during 2015. Gang violence was really getting out of control, and so many kids at young ages were being recruited by gang members or murdered. And so we made the second trip to the US, and fortunately made it. We applied for asylum. I had no plans, and I had no idea what I was going to do here in the US. The only thing we wanted was, with my family, was for us to be in a safe place. And fortunately, we were able to get back. We were fortunate to get here in the US and apply for asylum. And thanks to organizations like the Dream Project, I was able to get mentorship and be able to receive the guidance that I needed in order to apply to college, to different colleges. And so I applied to college, and thankfully I was accepted and got a scholarship that covered 98% of my tuition, along with the scholarship that the Dream Project provides. And so I'm very thankful to be part of this organization and everyone that contributes to this wonderful, wonderful organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. It was one of the many reasons why I enjoy working with the Dream Project is getting to know wonderful students like Ricardo. And the mission of the Dream Project is to support immigrant youth whose status impacts their ability to receive and higher education. Now to the main event. We're having a couple technical challenges. But hopefully Roberto Lovato is going to be able to come on. Excellent. Hi, Roberto. I'll introduce Roberto as a journalist, an activist, an educator, and he is the author of a family memoir called Unforgetting. He was born in the US to Salvadoran parents. He has lived between two worlds, growing up in San Francisco, but regularly spending time in El Salvador as a child, and later as a journalist and an activist. Unforgetting, a memoir of family, migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas was published in 2020 by HarperCollins. And it is a work of journalism and a memoir that stretches across 90 years of his family's life in El Salvador and the United States. It's the story of love for a place and a people, but also of horrific violence and corrupt politics. Roberto, we're so happy to have you, and let me invite you to read from your book to get us going.
Well, before anything, I want to thank Ricardo for sharing his story, and thank you, Marie and Senor Habib, for inviting me to join the Dream Project in your important work with young people. I don't write with an audience in mind when I write, but if I had to pick an audience, it would be young Salvadorans like Ricardo, who often come here. They're coming from a country that is an amnesiac country, which actually the United States is. Well, you don't get Donald Trump unless you have amnesia as a country. I would argue you don't get Barack Obama, the person that started caging, separating Central American children by the tens of thousands, either. He doesn't get the credit he deserves for doing that to those children. So I'm happy to be with you. And what I thought I would do is start with a little taste of the writing itself, which is where I put most of the work. You know, it was 5 years in the process, and you know, it's a labor of love. I mean, up until now, the primary phrase about Salvadorans in El Salvador and the United States, and the primary phrase about El Salvador comes from a liberal writer named Joan Didion. She said that terror is the given of the place. Most people don't know that she wrote that after spending all of 2 weeks in El Salvador, mostly in the company of embassy officials and in air-conditioned offices. But it sounds really great, like, wow, terror is the given of the place. And I used to actually buy into it. I'd be like, wow, that's deep. Joan Didion said it. And then I realized, hey, holy shit, I have 50 plus years dealing with El Salvador. And there's a lot more to El Salvador and the Salvadoran people than terror. I mean, there is terror. And I have, as you read in my book, experience of, unfortunately, of Salvadoran terror. And it's no joke, but it's also not this fantasy that Joan Didion wrote about. So I wrote my book as a way of saying, you know, it's love. Terror is the given of the place, but so is love. Salvadorans are, as you all know, there in DC, are the largest Latinx community in Washington, DC, and bring a lot of color and beauty and activism and a lot of things that is not in any of your news coverage in the United States in the English language. So I wrote the book as an antidote. And so to illustrate what I'm trying to do, I want to take you to 2009, San Salvador. My book is a story of my journey into several underworlds, the underworld of my father's and family history. There's a lot of secrets, like a lot of your family, whether you're Salvadoran or not, you have a lot of family secrets, most of you. You know, the underworld of crime that my dad was involved in fact. He was involved in contraband, building a contraband network. The underworld of gangs and youth violence that I was involved in and that I also reported on as a journalist, and the underworld of the guerrillas, the FMLN guerrillas, which I was also a part of and had talked about in the book. The other underworld is the underworld of nations, the secrets of countries that they hide from us, like in, again, news reports that tell you Donald Trump is evil for caging, separating, and killing Central American children. But it's okay that Barack Obama did it. How is that, right? I have the receipts. I've seen the bones of the 4-year-old girls that Obama, like Trump, pushed to their awful deaths in the deserts of Sonora. I've been in the grave sites. I've smelled the awful smell of a bunch of people dead in a mass grave. So, you know, how is it that we have these secrets of nations? And so that's part of my project too. So this is about this what I'm going to read you right now is a little bit of, it's me in San Salvador in 1991. I've just, you know, I've been in El Salvador living for a while. And again, I'm a US born kid. I'm not from El Salvador. I'm born here of Salvadoran parents. And I'm in San Salvador in 1991, and I decided to join the FMLN guerrillas after seeing what the US-backed fascist military dictatorship had done to Salvadoran people, to members of my family and whatnot. And I decided it wasn't just enough to do humanitarian work. So I decided to subvert the fascist military dictatorship. And so I'm in my apartment where nobody knows where I'm at, really, in my family. And I'm trying to think, what the hell am I doing? How did I get into this? And so as I'm thinking that, I get a phone call, and I'll just say I was in San Francisco, you know, the previous year, and I left a woman, her name is G, kind of hanging, as far as like we fell in love, but I was a 25-year-old dumbass and didn't know to recognize it. And so I left to El Salvador to the war, and I left her kind of hanging. And G was a no slouch herself. She was a leader in the FMLN and a diplomat and an explosives expert. And sometimes not a very patient person. And so she wasn't patient about my ambiguity. And so I'll introduce it that way. So I'm in my apartment, and then I got my own shock months later as I was lying in my apartment in San Salvador, sipping some cola champagne, one of the piss gold soft drinks every Latin American country has. I was reflecting on how much things had changed for me since leaving San Francisco the year before, when the phone rang. An unusual occurrence, given that I lived in a place where few except the compas, the FMLN, and compas at Criptes knew about. Bueno, may I help you? Hola, Beto! The silky, sweet voice sounded familiar, but before my heart leaped, I paused. G, I asked? Yes. Where are you? San Salvador. What? Yes, I'm here. You're here? I said, my voice reaching higher octaves of disbelief. Yes. I remained silent for a moment, stunned at the fact that this woman who publicly represented the FMLN had somehow managed to get into the country. The Salvadoran government had her and other publicly identified members of the FMLN on their list of people to detain on site at any airport or border crossing. G could be killed if they caught her here. What are you doing here? I asked. I'm here on some important business and need to speak with you, she said in her trademark, no-nonsense tone. Sure, when and where do you want to meet? Let's meet where the light shines, she said, which was code for Las Antorchas, an open-air restaurant frequented by the compas. The restaurant had torches all around its edges. I wanted to know about this special mission almost as much as I simply wanted to see her. I showered, put on some nice clothes, and armed myself with my secret weapon, Jovan Musk Oil, my preferred cologne. I showed up a little late to find a smiling G already there. A white-haired guitarist was playing Ella, a lovely bolero from Mom and Pop's era, in front of a couple at a nearby table. G was looking ever the summer beauty in a black flowered dress that hung on her tight body wonderfully. The Salvadoran sun made her round face look especially radiant. Being G, she rocketed through the niceties and then started in with the reason she'd come. The smell of flat iron beef grilling beneath a thatched palm roof and the fancy blue tropical drinks with little wooden umbrellas in them gave the restaurant on busy Boulevard de los Héroes a suave, intimate beach vibe made stronger by all the antorchas. So T, she said, I'm here with some important news. How did you get into the country? The compañeros got me some glasses, a wig, and a fake passport. And I came in through the Guatemala border, she said, en voz bajita. Wow, that's pretty gutsy. Noting her need to talk about the mission, I asked, so what brings you here? Well, to be honest, you left me in limbo, T. Huh? In limbo? What do you mean? What the fuck is she bringing this up for? Before you left, she said, when we were getting to know each other in San Francisco, you said we were more than friends. You gave me chocolates, you wrote poetry, and gave me other signs that led me to believe that what you said was true. Well, yeah, it's kind of true, I guess, but yes, and on the other hand, you left things ambiguous, she interjected. You weren't sure what we were after such beautiful moments we spent together. Yes, I said, still waiting for the larger mission to reveal itself. You know me, Beto. You know that I like to be clear, said G, sounding like the focused diplomat and explosives expert she was. Yes, you do. You know that I can't stand ambiguity. No, you can't. So I will just tell you, Tito, I'm in love with you and need to know how you feel about me. I've been dealing with this ambiguity since last year and want you to be clear with me. I can't keep living like this. Uh-oh, that's what you fucking came here for? Me? Fuck. Subversive in war turned out to also mean subversive in love. My immediate thought, Jean came here to undermine my game plan of macking on lots of women in wartime El Salvador. But I also recognize our shared desire. I kept looking at her in disbelief, and a rush of memories came back to me. Walking near my old church, talking about opera, feeling like she actually liked me for me, despite feeling like the fucked up kid in the mission. Fuck. So I did the obvious thing any red-blooded revolucionario salvadoreño macho would do in such a potentially explosive situation. Excuse me for a second. I have to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Okay, she said in a tone that said, what the fuck? On my way to the bathroom, I walked up to the old guitarist dude playing music in the restaurant and whispered in his ear. Then I went to the bathroom, combed my hair, and washed my face before I came out blasting like I was Michael Corleone entering gangster life at the Bronx Italian restaurant. I strolled back to the table. So you want an answer? I asked, standing before her with the guitarist behind me. Here's your answer. The guitarist started playing Sabor a Mi. I'd first learned the lyrics of the classic bolero turned lowrider oldie about the lover's taste about pop when Pop used to play it for Mom. Now I put his Orphic powers to use myself. I started serenading G. The song ended. I smiled and said, there's your answer. She smiled back and got up to put her face close to mine. We paused to inhale each other's breaths, and then our lips finally touched. We decided to go to a cheap motel used by prostitutes working near Tia Esperanza's house on 5 de Noviembre Street. Early the next morning, before dawn, as we floated out of the motel high on new love, we were greeted by the sight of soldiers who were about to a block and a half away and coming our way. We turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, hoping that a taxi or some other vehicle might come in our direction, but there were no cars in sight. An eternity passed before we saw the lights of a vehicle approaching. Surely, our last opportunity to escape torture and likely death. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. That's a fantastic passage. I enjoyed reading it just a few days ago. This book is titled Unforgetting, and I had to think a lot about that. It's not called Remembering, but Unforgetting, and you actually link it to a Greek term, aletheia, which is about uncovering truth. So what does unforgetting mean to you, the concept?
Well, the first phrase in my book, the first sentence is, the machete of memory can cut swiftly or slowly. So, you know, they say that when you write a memoir, you're making a commentary on the nature of memory. So I thought about that, and I thought, well, what is memory for me? And memory for me as a Salvadoreño is that it's been macheted up, it's been chopped up. I mean, the fact is that all of our memories have been chopped up by what I call the ultimate machete of memory, borders, right? They put these artificial lines in the sand and in the dirt, in the mountains, and in the cities even. And they make us believe that we are separate peoples, that we are a separate planet almost. That's why you get aliens and citizens on either side of the border, quote unquote aliens. So I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about, memory for me is not just memory. For me, the book and Unforgetting itself is an act of what in America Latina we call memoria histórica, which is not just memory, but it's historical memory. It's the use of memory in the pursuit of justice. So I see my book as a way to pursue justice, not just with respect to the Salvadoran government that's headed by neo-fascist President Nayib Bukele right now, right? But there's a whole, history of fascist military dictatorships in El Salvador, like the one that I fought. And so, I wanted to, it just seems to me like, those military dictatorships were made possible by, drum roll please, the United States of America. The United States funded the Salvadoran military dictatorships for decades, since they recognized the most barbaric, murderous dictator in the history of the Americas. And that's saying a lot. A guy named Maximiliano Hernandez Martinez, who in 1932 slaughtered somewhere between 10, 20, possibly up to 40,000 people in a matter of about 3 weeks or less. So you look at polls of Salvadorans, like one in 2000 7 that I found. And most Salvadoreños don't know about La Matanza of 1932. Even though, as Roque Dalton, the great poet, says, todos nacimos medio muertos en 1932. We were all born half dead in 1932 when that slaughter took place, and it's been erased from the historical memory of the state. It's barely taught in the country, and people are starting to, the indigenous peoples of El Salvador, the Izalco peoples, and others are organizing to try to, make, and other people that are non-indigenous are also organizing to make that. So given that our memories are chopped up like that, they're also chopped up in our families. In my family, I grew up in a house where, for example, I'm here on Mission Street. I grew up on Folsom Street, 3 blocks from here in San Francisco, in our crowded immigrant apartment, down the street from the projects. And our small little living room had all kinds of pictures of my abuelita on my mom's side, my grandmother, my tias, my tios, my cousins, the cousin's dog, the cousin's dog's dog. Everybody had a place in my mom's living room. But in case of my father's family, there was only one picture of my mama Te, the matriarch of our family that brought us here, whose story is also in my book. So, given the family secrets and the hidden memories, given the hidden memories of nations, I wanted to show how fragmented we are from ourselves, whether it's fragmented families that are separated across thousands of miles, fragmented children who don't know anything about their history, living here in the United States, like young people like Ricardo, who I'm sure knows a lot about his history, but a lot of young people that came like that don't know their history. And amnesiacs make for good gang members, good soldiers, because that's how you do it. If you don't know your history, you're more susceptible to all these things. So I wrote it so that we would understand ourselves better and to talk about the fragmented nature of what we call trauma, right? And so you see the structure I have in the book is divided between time and space. And if you're, whoever you are, if you live in the modern era, your memory is fragmented. Your sense of identity is fragmented. So having a fragmented narrative was a way to reflect that. But the act of writing for me was a way to connect the bones of our memory and bring back the skeleton of who we are and then give it back to ourselves.
In many ways, Roberto, it reminds me of some of the great literature from Latin America, like Isabel Allende's House of the Spirits or 100 Years of Solitude. It's an epic family narrative, and yet it's also telling this complex, deeper story of multiple places, El Salvador and certainly San Francisco and your family. I feel like I know something about you and your family after reading the book. The work documents, and it's chopped up, and doing that, I think it does reveal the machete cutting softly and swiftly and slowly. It also has this sense of the cycles of violence that have erupted throughout El Salvador. And there's a quote that stuck with me about when you write, more and more I was realizing that violence doesn't just happen. It turns you into the frog in boiling water who doesn't realize it's dying until it's too late. It creeps up on you in small ways until it overtakes your life. And this reflection, what did you learn about violence and its impact on your communities?
Well, I grew up, as you read in the book, I grew up in a violent household. I was beaten, I was humiliated, and I was shown the Bible and told things that you don't talk back to your parents. And I also rebelled because I'm the youngest in my family. And I think I don't know, there's something about being the youngest sometimes that so I learned that violence has intimate roots, but the the intimate roots of our families are often used to blame we ourselves as a peoples for the roots of violence, when in fact the roots of violence are as much or more institutional, right? Institutional, not in terms of just guns given to the Salvadoran government, or not just the training for death squads at the School of the Americas, where, for example, you have the massacre of El Mozote that people are still talking about and trying to figure out what happened. We know what happened. We're just trying to see how many people were killed. We now know that 1,000 people were killed in a town in a day, in hours, primarily by U.S. trained troops of the Atlacat Battalion. And 10 of the 12 leaders of the Atlacat Battalion, including Diego Monterrosa, the leader, were trained at the School of the Americas. So they were trained by U.S. troops who were the good guys in the movies. You know, they're the guys who were in the Thor and Marvel comics, the Hulk and the Avengers, right? Hey, look at that. The U.S. troops are helping Salvadoran military slaughter entire towns, and not just in El Mozote, but throughout the country, to the tune of 80,000 people were killed. 85% of those people killed were killed by their own government, according to the United Nations Truth Commission. 85%. The FMLN guerrillas killed 5%, according to the UN, right? So, you know, I wanted to kind of understand what drives people to violence, and I've learned that, you know, this comes about because of for institutional and political reasons. Half of the 1,000 people killed in El Mozote were 12-year-old children or younger. Half of the 12-year-old children or younger were under 6. Hundreds of children killed by U.S. trained troops, armed by U.S. money from Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter before him, and George Bush after him. And then the violence ended in the war, we thought, and then it didn't. The violence continued when the Salvadoran government starts seeing that they have these new structures, these new gangs that were born in LA, where I also was. I lived and I worked there when the gangs were started, and the Maras. And so, you know, they were born in Pico Union, where my office was, when I was leading CARES in the Central American Refugee Center that became the Central American Resource Center. So the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service deported thousands of young men to a country that had just come out of one of the most savage and barbaric wars backed by the U.S. In the American hemisphere. And it was a perfect ground for the gangs to grow. And the gang and the government, instead of trying to deal with it in a human way, which is, you know, create jobs, create youth programs, you're going to watch the gangs disappear. I've seen it in action, where if you treat people like human beings, they tend not to go into gangs. So I was a rebellious kid, and when I was treated well, I got out of the clique that I was involved in, and I turned around. So I learned that a lot of responsibility for Salvadoran violence lies with the United States of America, with every major president, from Ronald Reagan to Bill Clinton to George Herbert Walker Bush to Bill Clinton to George Walker Bush, G.W. Bush, to Barack Obama, who, when I was in El Salvador, delivered millions of dollars to the Salvadoran government, military and police, so that they could continue slaughtering gangs with impunity, because most of the crimes are not investigated, whether they're perpetrated by the gangs or by the government. And they've been continued by Donald Trump, and they are being continued by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So that's a little bit of what I've learned.
I make the point in the book that, you know, occasionally in the press, it's the crisis of Central American refugees at the border or unaccompanied minors, as if it comes out of nowhere, and you're tracing a deeper pattern of relationships and cause and effect, violence beginning violence. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between gangs in the U.S. and gangs in El Salvador, and your own experience in trying to break that cycle of violence?
Yeah, I work in, one of the things I do when I can and I have time and space to do it is I'm an expert witness in political asylum claims of people fleeing gangs or people fleeing murderous police in El Salvador or murderous military. And so one of the things that, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
The relationship between gangs in the U.S.
Okay,
and gangs
yes.
in El
So
Salvador.
one of the things that so I often have to kind of counter the absolute lies, myths, and ridiculous stories told by the U.S. government, whether it's the president or the State Department or the lawyers for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, right? They tell these fabulous stories of MS-13 is this transnational terror organization. And that's total bullshit. They are a poor people's gang. Most of them are very young. They are, El Salvador is not a major transit country for the transfer of narcotics and drugs and things. Honduras, Guatemala are. But the gangs in El Salvador aren't part of that economy. They're not these transnational. So the cliques that were born here and then were transferred there have the same name in some cases. They know some of the same people, but they're not organically connected into this big transnational terror threat that people like Obama, Trump, the Biden administration, the police departments in Los Angeles and across the US, mediocre or really fictitious journalists like Lisa Ling, who made MS-13 into be the most violent gang in the world. Okay, well, where's the statistical basis for that? Right? I've had to go into court. As a journalist, I've had to go and say, well, let's see how many people here in San Francisco, MS-13, which is one of their hubs, San Francisco, how many people has MS-13 killed in 2019, according to homicide statistics and conversations with the gang experts at the SFPD. And you want to guess how many people were killed in San Francisco in 2019? Given that this is a major hub.
Right. No
and
idea.
there's 10,000 MS-13 members in the United States, according to the FBI. One person was killed by MS-13 in 2019. One, in San Francisco. In Long Island, New York, the average was 5.5 per year for the last 10 years. Los Angeles has similar statistics. Virginia, all these places where MS-13 operates in the United States don't have anything to declare them a terror organization in terms of homicides. You'd think if they were a terrorist organization, there would be massive homicides. But what they've done is take the fact that MS-13 started off using machetes, not because they were savage or anything, but because they were poor, immigrant, undocumented kids who couldn't afford the Uzis and the Uzis and AK-47s, M16s that the Crips, the Bloods, and the Mexican Mafia here in California could afford, right? I've, interviewed these folks, and I was there when this stuff was happening. And so, you get this big story of this big, evil, transnational terrorist threat that's repeated by fascists like Bukele, or the president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez. Gangs are good. Gangs are kind of like communists used to be. They're the things that these politicians use to kind of trick people into believing that they're actually doing something when they're not doing anything, except maybe exacerbating problems. So that's what I've learned. I learned that MS-13 in El Salvador has a large number of children, and I mean children, 11, 12, 13. You don't hear that in the news. You don't hear that from the Justice Department. You don't hear that from Donald Trump. You didn't hear that from the Obama administration that paid these experts to come out with these reports that are just fantabulous lies. So, and as you see, I'm pretty fair in my assessment. I'm not one of these liberal people who want to protect Barack Obama because he's black. I have to do my job as a journalist because he's the president of the United States, and he's killed children, he's caged them, and he's separated them just as viciously as Donald Trump, except he didn't do it with the racist rhetoric of Donald Trump. He did it with a smile and said, "Si se puede."
He does have the record of deporting more people than any president during his 8 years.
But we're not talking about what he did in the deserts. 3,000 people died, many of them Central Americans. You know, where you see, you know, they die in the deserts because the U.S. government has weaponized the desert. I've been to that desert. I've seen those grave sites. I've seen the little bones of the little girls. So, you know, I have to be true to the truth, not to some phony political ideology that people have that wants to protect presidents of the United States because of their race.
Roberto, you comment about yourself as a youth. You loved books. Your nickname was Mr. Peabody, and you have been a successful journalist. And obviously, I think your story, your experience is your own, but it's not totally unique given all the Latinx immigrants in the U.S. What led you to be a journalist?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I've been reading since I was a little kid. I just loved reading. Me and my friend Freddie Weinstein used to spend a lot of our time in the library, and we loved books so much we conspired together to steal the entire 15-book collection of the Danny Dunn adventure series, science fiction kind of. And you know, so my first criminal act was also one of my major endeavors of literature, oddly enough. And so, you know, I've always read, I've always loved reading, and I always imagined maybe one day I'll see my book on the shelf. And I held that secret for a long time, and I've always kept journals, you know, personal journals, journals of things that I've seen and done, journals of people, descriptions. I mean, just pick up like Virginia Woolf's journal writing. You can learn a lot about it if you want to do that. Those of you that are listening and want to kind of get into writing more. But I've always written. I just made a decision in 2004 that I was a political person. I still am. You know, I was engaged in the crisis of my times, and I thought a good way to kind of attack, because we need to attack right now more than ever, is journalism. Attack falsity, attack the corruption, attack the murder with truth, with documented truth, with facts. So that really drew me to journalism. And some of the great journalists that I met, people that used to interview me, and they said, "Hey man, you have a story to tell yourself." I was like, "Oh, okay, well that seed was in there, and then it bore fruit later, like in the book." So yeah, it's my love of writing, I love the Word of God. I read the Bible more than anybody in my family because I was the only one that didn't do his primera comunión, his first Holy Communion, as a Catholic. I rejected the whole project. But I was so guilty because my mom was always on my case that I was like, okay, I better read this fucking Bible. So I would read the Bible voraciously. I read the whole thing as a kid. I didn't understand everything, but I read it. And, you know, it was the King James Version. So the love of language was fed by the love of God. And, you know, there's that quote in the Bible that says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." I was like, whoa, the power of the Word. Damn, I love that. So these are the things that are kind of at work. I no longer am a Christian. I'm no longer a believer. I used to be an evangelical right-wing fascist too, like many Salvadoran families right now. I hate to tell you all if you're listening, but some of your parents who are in those right-wing Christian churches voting for Trump and supporting Bukele are inclined towards fascism increasingly. Don't be afraid to admit that. I'm not. I used to be one of them. We have to come to grips with that. Those of you listening know exactly what I'm talking about. And we can't be shy about the truth, the difficult and sometimes dark truths that our families hold. I mean, I've had students tell me they've had family that are death squad operatives. after I tell them to go do some research in their families, they end up finding out that there's an escuadronero in their family. Like, holy shit. So, these are the kinds of interests that led me to journalism and to other writing.
And you're also an educator. You run a Central American studies program in Northridge, and
I did.
Oh, you did.
I was. I call it a bootleg chair of the first Central American Studies program in the United States. I say bootleg because I did everything that a chair of a department did. Lead a curriculum design process. Recruit faculty get the approvals in all the boring meetings. Recruit faculty, kind of orient them. Recruit students, fill the classrooms, go to a lot of boring meetings, as I said, but I wouldn't go to the bank with the same check as a chair. I did it as an adjunct, as did everybody in the program. So, yeah, I had an experience from 2000 to about 2004, 5. And it was a marvelous experience. I'm starting to teach again, and I'm getting more and more interested in, kind of trying to find a home academically so I can, have that. I love teaching.
So books, this comes out of your experience. You write that your father as a little boy saw the massacre in 1932, and yet it's now, after you've had a really complicated and interesting life, probably several lifetimes. Why now? What was so urgent for you to get this story out?
Well, I was actually, as many Salvadorans will know, it's kind of hard to be Salvadoran, to be frank, given the levels of violence and terror that our people have lived through. Just like the people of Palestine are suffering at the hands of the Israeli government right now. Bombing, killing, military shooting, all those things. When I see those images of those poor Palestinian children blown to bits, it takes me back to Chalatenango. It takes me to El Salvador, and I cry and I feel sad. And I have these feelings since the 80s and 90s, and I kind of put them away because I didn't want to look at them. That's what a natural response is to trauma, is to look away from it and not deal with it. We do this in the belief that it's going to go away or something. When you don't deal with it, it's there doing its work. I mean, I argue in other circles that when you're talking to a gang member, you're talking to somebody who's a walking, talking, unresolved Salvadoran trauma made in the U.S., right? Your people are violent for a reason. I've interviewed death squad operatives. I became friends with one without even knowing, as you read in the book. And I, me encariñé. I had affection and care for this person. And then I find out they're a death squad operative. Fuck, what am I to do? During the war, we might have had to go kill each other. But I didn't do that. It was after the war, and I just never talked to him again. But I wanted to bring the reader in that journey to understand how complex the roots of violence are and what makes people killers, right? What makes people killers is society. We'd like to wash our hands of it by doing what the United States has done to the Black communities, erase their history, put them in jail, continue the legacy of slavery into the present day. Well, I don't really like that. And so I wanted to write a book that helped people understand and put them in the position that I was in, to have to look at a killer, whether it's a death squad operative or a top level gang member who had human qualities, unlike the monstrous image that you see. Right? And then it also makes us look at the monster in ourselves. I mean, I'm not a person that lives in the fiction of good and evil anymore. Those are infantile stories they tell you in the Bible and all that stuff, and it's useless for such a complex society that we live in, and it's dangerous. That's why I think people, evangelical Salvadorans, for example, that are rooting for simplistic, dangerous storytellers like Donald Trump or Nayib Bukele, need to really be countered with complexity and truth.
Well, Roberto, that is what you've given us in Unforgetting. It's a fantastic book. You won't be able to put it down. There are many twists and turns. I was thinking today, as Nicole Hannah-Jones was in the news because she did a 1619 project and she decided they didn't give her tenure, even though she's had a MacArthur Genius Grant. But she also, in writing that story of African Americans, is telling an unforgetting story about bringing truth, and it's sometimes painful to hear and read, but there's also, I suppose, a cleansing that comes from reckoning with painful pasts, and you do it beautifully. So thank you very much, Roberto. I think we are near the end of our time. Any last comments, Roberto?
Well, I mean, I just don't want to give the impression that it's a heavy book. It's got heaviness, but there's also levity.
There is, and humor, and
humor, there's color, and there's beautiful people. There's music, a lot of music, lowrider music, cumbias, Salvadoran revolutionary music. I mean, that's, I guess, the takeaway of the book really is that I've been through 2,500 miles, 30 years of a landscape overrun with mass graves, with wars, with genocide. I've inherited an incredible thing, as you read about my father in the book, an incredible legacy of extreme terror and trauma that I didn't even know I had, but that was what was fueling my anger. I've gone across this landscape and I've seen, gang violence, narco violence, and talked to victims. But the book that's kind of the dark velvet background of the story. The story is really about the tenderness that survives the terror. How do you remain a tender, caring person when you've seen and been through war and other things? It's kind of what the book is about. And I write it as an object lesson in a way for those that are going to be navigating the future that's guaranteed to have a severe and even apocalyptic realities that we're going to have to face, just beginning with climate change and ending with climate change. So I've written a book that really is my blueprint. Say, hey, here's why I don't have a fucking bullet in my head, right? And so it's the best that I have. It's the color and the beauty that help me cruise through and navigate my own 9 circles of Dante's hell. So, and it leads me to my next book, and I'll leave you with that, which is going to be more colorful and openly, directly. It's called Letters to a Young Poet Warrior. I have ideas of poetry and literature that are Latinoamericanista, they're Salvadoreño, like Roque Dalton, the great revolutionary poet, who also is the greatest poet in El Salvador and a poet admired throughout the Americas by Pablo. He was admired by Neruda, Galeano, Julio Cortázar, many great writers in the Americas who looked at Roque Dalton like, wow. And Roque was also happened to be a guerrilla fighter, like me. So I come from a tradition in the Americas that is going to be very useful now at a time when we're going to need spiritual nurturing to carry us forward in this very difficult, brave new world that we're about to face. And so I'm dropping the best knowledge that I have more directly in this book. I'm calling Letters to a Young Poet Warrior. And I incite all the young people, not just to read my stuff, but to go out there and become poet warriors. Just don't be a poet like some of these Pulitzer Prize winning mediocres that have no commitment to their world. But be a poet warrior. Go out there and take the world in your hands and help change it.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on. I know in the Dream Project, we value the students we help and their tremendous resilience, overcoming enormous difficulties. So thank you very much, Roberto. I believe Mark Habib has the last word.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Roberto. There's no way I can top what you said there at the end, and I'm already looking forward to your next book. And Roberto said it perfectly. This book is powerful. There are scenes in it that are very heavy, but overall, this is really an ode to resilience and to love. There's so many loving people in here, and so it's a very real description of the reality of El Salvador, warts and all. And as Barbara Ehrenreich said on the back, it's a coming of age story, a thriller, and a slice of hemispheric history all at once. Fabulous book. Click on the Busboys and Poets, buy the book from Busboys. Please support the Dream Project. I want to announce that we're going to go on a brief hiatus over the summer for this program, because we realize now that the days are getting long and people are going out and about, that maybe watching Zoom talks at 6 o'clock in the evening is not everybody's idea of a great time in the summer. So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back in the fall, and we're hoping by then that we'll be able to do some live in-person programs at Busboys restaurants. And of course, all of those would be hybrid too. So there'll always be the option of watching it online. But thank you so much for your support. Thank you for joining. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the fall.